This is such a perfect metaphor. So, while the ModDB article suggests this level was the apex of their design skills, it fails to mention that they're not really skilled at designing levels. Overall, the section is basically a sample pack of amateur design decisions that belong in a first draft mod, which is why you should never spend 9 years on your first draft mod. Overall, the streets are nearly as oppressively boring as the non-lethal route, but that's pretty much just basic design with a few quirks. Let's have a look at some of those quirks and where they come up lacking. So right after you climb out of the tunnels, the first change is that they've added more crap to the alleyway and made the abandoned building darker. And then you discover that they've also added this weird door between you and the gate key. It can't be opened, but it's made of wood and barred from the other side, so using most video game logic, you'd think you'd have to go through a series of some puzzles to get the prize on the other side, and then you can use this door to save backtracking, right? That or you could just blow it the fuck up. Nope. Literally everything about this door is a lie. It's unbreakable. I mean really unbreakable. It's just there to show you that at some point they worked out how to block a door with an indestructible object and effectively create a wall. So why not just use a wall, or a wall with a door texture if you're really that determined? Much like earlier levels, so much of this level and the adjacent metro station is dedicated to promoting luxuries that seem to be completely subverting the idea of occupation by Majestic 12. Seriously, this is how Caustic Creative imagines military occupation by Majestic 12 under Bob Page.
Why contain it? Let it spill over to the schools and churches. Let the bodies pile up in the streets. In the end, they'll beg us to save them.
I can't even credit it for aesthetic improvement, since it flies in the face of all the game's fluff and isn't really suited to the Deus Ex story at all. It looks pretty much like they just disregarded the idea that there might be a reason why this area of Paris was so grey and depressing. It would, however, be perfectly suited to the Anna Navarra dating simulator, which is definitely a mod that someone should be working on. So in vanilla, there's this kind of weird setup with a turret that's linked to a camera and nowhere with a console, both of which are behind a window that's alarmed. In isolation, it's just silly, but in vanilla, it's part of this intense and complex setup that makes players weigh up the risks and rewards. So naturally, Caustic Creative took it out of the situation and moved it into isolation, and managed to make it more ridiculous. See, when a turret doesn't have JC to shoot at, it aims at other targets, like rats, in this trash. Majestic 12. Military grade pest control. It appears that they do most of their military grade pest controlling from this bizarre headquarters that could only exist in a video game and is unfulfilling even in that sense. Taking up the second story, there's apparently no first story, it's just, I don't know, full of bricks. This headquarters has wiring, a console that lets you send the robots to kill Majestic 12, and fancy candelabras everywhere. Now, in vanilla it seemed pretty clear that the Templar Knights hid in plain sight within their cathedral, since their banking network was pivotal to the success of all power mongers across the world. Hence, when only Bob Page showed the audacity to try to assume control of the world by force, they were unprepared. In a sense, the entire conquest of Paris was just a stepping stone to gain access and control over their network. So there was no reason for Majestic 12 to have this headquarters here. They didn't fight a prolonged campaign to control the cathedral, and the Templar Knights wouldn't have had infrastructure like this. Worst of all, it's not even satisfying from a mechanical perspective. It's a pair of stairwells accessed from basically the same spot, with the same puzzle arm rigged to them. Then it's an open plan hallway with a room at each end and a rebreather, which serves no purpose on this map. I checked. Basically, it's suggests this entire town was built from time immemorial simply to receive J.C. Denton. This apparently included the addition of 2 turrets on this bridge that are always active and ready to shoot, with what on medium difficulty must equate to rubber bullets. Now, this trap appears to be set up specifically for J.C. Denton, because his experience throughout the game would lead him to believe that these turrets could be disarmed by shooting out that camera. But of course, since this is revision, the camera is purely decorative and the turrets just shoot at you anyway. But to ensure that JC can prevail, the water is safe for you to swim through, and there's docks on both ends, because apparently a lot of people are swimming in this water. I don't know anymore. So I did a mini episode on the non-lethal tunnel and how it's the least engaging gameplay humanly possible. However, given the obscure location of the entrance, it's worth noting that they did at least make it possible to enter the exit of the tunnel. However, you will discover that the entrance apparently detonates garbage bags, and JC is unable to climb out if there's a rat floating over the gutter. Aside from the incredibly depressing nature of the swim, which I already covered in the minisode, I feel it's worth pointing out that they apparently added these buoys. Apparently there's a serious concern about ships colliding with the island? I don't know. So if you endure and make it to the outer Cathedral area, you'll discover that they've created a whole little island that completely circumvents all the ideas of a challenge. As covered on my minisode, you can just run straight up the trellis and get into the cathedral without obstacle. Or, if you're more aggressive, you can exploit the wall around it to allow you to safely scout out for enemies, shoot them in the genitalia, then drop into the water if you get in trouble. See, the enemies can't see you in the water, can't enter the water, and as such it just turns the entire security detail into a shooting gallery. Then, once you're in the cathedral, you discover that they didn't really change anything at all, so we'll just skip that bit. So why is all of this so vexing? Well, largely it's because by applying the arbitrary standard that pretty and spacious is always better than grey and compact, it's led to them redesigning most level from scratch for the first time. Now, level design is a skill set, and one where mastery is never truly achieved, only pursued. However, like all skill sets, when you start, you'll start simple. That means essentially to do 2-dimensional maps. They might be stacked on top of each other, but they won't overlap. You can create interesting scenarios using 2-dimensional maps like these. I mean, Vanilla does it as recently as the Catacombs. However, doing that does tend to require a lot of experience, insight into how people have responded to what you've built previously, and a really good understanding of a lot of complex theories and approaches to take. So basically how you learn it is you make a lot of levels, you release them, then you're in a position to receive feedback and make your next project better, rather than feel the need to defend your project even though it has some pretty glaring issues which are now inherently part of your design and hence pretty much unfixable. Anyway, let's have a look at the general considerations that were just horribly overlooked. So, the core of the Deus Ex franchise is the premise of a cyberpunk world actually controlled by shadowy secret societies made up of the elite and the fabulously wealthy. It's what makes the mechanics that allow for so many solutions and the need for all the options so compelling. Things are dangerous and you need to find out your own way to achieve your goals up against the ultimate enemies, who are literally the Illuminati, kind of. They achieve this by taking the familiar and then they change it to fit their dark and fatalistic view and put in some puppeteer strings. So for a map like this, you would expect something familiar, but given a bit of a dark twist. Say, a French cafe and its owner Pierre. In vanilla Deus Ex, you'd you'd expect that, say, Pierre's probably not doing well. He's probably got the Grey Death, had his cafe closed, and would be impoverished, or would have shifted into, say, drug dealing, or fighting for a militia, or arms dealing. Perhaps if you wanted to expand on these kind of scenarios, particularly given the proximity to the, if we can call it a war, with the Templar Knights, we'd see that Majestic 12 killed Pierre and started using his cold room of his cafe to store the bodies of the Templar Knights. Instead, what Revision would have us believe is that Pierre and everyone like him, they're fucking loaded now. They are all fucking rich. The French, as a people, are billionaires who spend all day eating chocolate, drinking wine, going to the theatre, and learning French so that they can get laid. So rather than use this as an opportunity to expand the story of Deus Ex, they use it as an opportunity to destroy it. So, particularly for hobbyist mod makers, but really for everyone doing any sort of game dev, considering the resources available is critical to all level design. Not just because your resources are limited, but because your player's time and interest is limited. It gets more limited if you put in random shit like this pointless rebreather and the tunnels of boredom. Firstly, nobody is impressed if you overload a game engine until it screams. They're only impressed with the actual result of your design. Anyone can do scope creep. Absolutely anyone.
It's so dense, every single image has so many things going on.
Secondly, outside of the people playing First Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons with all the expansions, nobody wants to memorize all the stats and tactics for hundreds of enemies. What people want is to encounter an interesting range of enemies over and over in new and interesting situations. That's why Vanilla has the trio of snipers with grenades on top of the bridge, with a commander on one side and a military bot on the other, and that turret underneath. They're all familiar elements, but they're arranged in a way that you've never seen before, and since they overlap, they augment each other's threat and ability. If you set up enemies in their own space with no overlap and hence no support, then a player who has developed skills appropriate to this portion of the game is going to find them less than challenging. And that's without factoring in all the weapons, orcs, etc. they may have. Okay, so anyway, we could look at the specifics for all these bizarre decisions for weeks, so let's move on. We move into the bottom floor of the cathedral. Everything else in the cathedral is pretty much exactly how it was in vanilla, and we discover that there's an EMP trap, which is totally what a hyper-violent mech would set up. Then we talk to Henry Rollins before he explodes all over the reflective floors, and go talk to Walt Disney, who looks really unimpressive in this sort of glam disco version of the final room. And we escaped too. The metro station, which is simple and straightforward since it's just a transition level that facilitates you meeting with Toby in a discrete area so that he can render you unconscious and transport you to meet with Everett. I'm just kidding, it's an overworked maze that's wildly inconsistent and covered in ads for luxury products and way more surveillance than any Illuminati member would ever want. Not only do they apparently check your ticket and or offer to help you at the front of the station, they also have a second station and a third station you have to pass through before you can get to the train. The main difference between the first station and these later stations is they have actual doors. The first station just has this section of wall painted to look like a door. I guess in Revisions Paris, they must be trying to encourage people to exercise more and eat less, since the walk is ridiculously long and the only business set up here seems to be this tiny cafe with bulletproof windows and guards with anterograde amnesia. Also a locked room for ATMs, even though there's some of the exact same ones just there. But finally we get to see Toby, who was blissfully unaware of his face being recycled earlier so that Caustic Creative could add racism to a game that was surprisingly progressive when it came out in 2000. And we get to move on to... So the first thing that you notice about Morgan's home is that he has the cops outside. I guess that Lucius has been playing the music too loud. What an asshole. The second thing that you notice is Morgan has redecorated and is desperately trying, and failing, to impress anyone who visits his house by telling them that he is rich as fuck, like his big house didn't already do that.
It's so dense, every single image has so many things going on.
And that he is in the Illuminati. I say failing because after all the ads for luxury goods, the redecoration of the club, the general overhaul of every street in Paris, it seems like Morgan actually maintains a below average standard of living for Paris. I mean, he has soy food and no gourmet chocolates. What a peasant. It's embarrassing to be seen with him, to be honest. The original design seemed to present Morgan as a man who wanted to impress his guests with his work, not with his baubles. It seems pretty much obvious that he didn't care for decorating his home because he didn't spend time in there, and frankly, who gives a shit about a painting when you can show them a burgeoning AI, particularly since all his peers would be in the Illuminati and would also be rich as fuck, so, like, how is he supposed to be impressing them? Secondly, these tapestries, these are Masonic symbols. Now, I don't know if Morgan Everett is supposed to be a Freemason, but even if he's not supposed to put these sort of things on display in his house for guests to see. It's kind of weird. It's almost like the limit of research that Caustic Creative did was to go, hey, where do we find more images with that eye with the triangle in it? That can't belong to any real-world group, can it? Oh well. Lol. But what's even weirder is we've had level after level of depressing darkness. So naturally Revision decided to leave the most sad and depressing room in the game well lit and pretty much as it was in vanilla. That's right. This asshole who's been playing the music too loud is apparently not an important part of Everett's home, even though he's there to showcase Everett's ruthlessness and put a hard decision on the player. I mean, Morgan's happy to keep this guy in a bar fridge even though he's his mentor figure and he has the technology to restore his health. That's pretty heavy, but yeah, apparently didn't warrant doing any sort of redecorating. I don't know, maybe a TV of evil in the name of giving him stimulus without letting him know anything about what's going on. I don't know, who knows, who cares. But you know what room they did alter? Yeah, Morpheus got his room redecorated to make it all dramatic and flashy, thus missing the entire point of the character, the room, and the deeper reading available. See, to us, Morpheus is this incredible miracle machine that processes incalculable data and talks to us about its deep philosophical observations in this grandiose manner. Perhaps the first in a new kind of life, a self-aware artificial intelligence. To Everett, Morpheus is a redundant prototype that he keeps to impress his guests and has been updating the hardware out of idle curiosity. The deeper reading of this is, of course, that Everett is ruthless enough to imprison both his father figure and what is essentially his child in shitty storerooms with no regards for their boredom or pain or anything else. But anyway, let's briefly take a moment to appreciate the greatest dramatic moment in the history of video games.
The fuel system. Now that you mention it. Wait a minute. This isn't right.
What isn't?
Oh my god, JC, a bomb!
A bomb.
So essentially, the whole set of levels between the Cathedral and the end of Everett's home are the most pronounced complete departure from attempting to keep the story, the tone, or the game design principles of the original Deus Ex, and instead discarding all of that to try to make the most aesthetically pleasing environments they could with their limited experience. This is particularly a shame since these are the last really relatable environments to most players, unless you've spent a lot of time in an Air Force base, Area 51, or some sort of science mega lab. Plus, level design aesthetics is a really hard thing to master, and not something you can just blunder into and hope that you'll get a great result with a little bit of fiddling here and there. There are professional developers at GDC who are telling other professional developers that games developers in general need to go learn a lot from interior design and to develop a strong understanding of it so that they can help build better games. That's not to say that you can't point out flaws or disagree with the design choices in the original. I know I do. But you should at least make sure that you have some sort of basis beyond the Dunning-Kruger Effect first, and you should also be very aware of your own limitations and the amount of resources, particularly time, that you need to invest in something in order to do better. These levels are also a cautionary tale for when you do long projects like this. It can be really frustrating and depressing to be doing all of this work with no feedback, or just feedback from other people doing the same work. And you can get a quick fix of positive feedback by sharing some bold claims and then providing some carefully tailored screenshots to stimulate people's imagination. But ultimately, screenshots don't define the experience. The actual gameplay and the immersion in the levels will do that. If you're not going to bother focusing on that instead, you may as well be making something else that requires good aesthetics. And another dating simulator. This kind of temptation easily leads you to become preoccupied with things that don't really matter and to also dramatically overestimate your own abilities. After all, if people are getting excited about how they imagine your changes, that means that the original was very inferior, right? Well, not really. And ultimately, if you're doing a revision of a game that people love, you should try to find what people really loved about it and include more of that. Not just try to make it more aesthetically pleasing in screenshots and videos and or more like other games that people may or may not have loved. How are you going to know? But you should also be aware that that's going to be hard to do, since all the best stuff is always the things that require a lot of experience, experimenting, and willingness to scrap whatever isn't working. It's going to be something that requires a lot of pre-production and a lot of time on the production schedule where you go back and redo stuff that's already done. If that doesn't sound fun, it's because it usually isn't. But it's necessary to create the analysis of your own work, the introspection, and then polish that defines a great product. More than concept, aesthetics, or grandiosity in marketing, what matters most is the overall gameplay experience and what it gives you to take away from the game. The new Deus Ex games also failed on this point, but they were always destined to do that due to... oh shit, I'd need a whole new video for that. Revision failed at this simply because Caustic Creative got hooked on the praise for the mod that people imagined they were going to make, and instead ended up making, well, this mess and trying to pitch it as the mod that everyone wanted them to make, but they were probably never going to be able to make anyway. Oh well. Why am I wasting my life on this? Surely Revision is dead by now and nobody could be working on it. I'll just check to see if anything happened while I was working on this video. Well, at least nobody else is promoting it or saying that it's a good thing. I suppose this had to happen. After all, Square Enix has announced that the whole Deus Ex property is going into cold storage, so they don't need to give a shit about any free marketing related to the property. Disclaimer, I don't think it's Revision's fault that the property's going into cold storage. I guess GOG has showed us that things come to those who wait. Well, I suppose it's still a less worrying business decision than expecting people to pay actual money for Daikatana. And technically this is the most recent Square Enix product, if I can use that term, in their catalogue by an actual decade. Okay, well, I guess I'm going on to Vandenberg. Thankfully I'm led to believe that this is one of the areas that Revision didn't actually revise very much. Thank you for watching, and may the Illuminati Artificial Intelligence God have mercy on your cybernetic soul.